Hello and welcome to a full Revolution Raksha guide that requires no prayer flicking and provides you with kill times of 4 to 4.5 minutes. Whenever you're ready, grab your cup of tea, sit back, relax, and enjoy. If you like all kinds of Runescape content, be sure to subscribe. This is a video guide of Itscrayonz Raksha guide, and he deserves full credit for coming up with the setup and action bar used in this video. Let's move on. Raksha is a boss with 800,000 life points that is both immune to stuns and poison. The boss has 4 phases. Since this is a very specific method, you're going to want to have all the requirements listed on screen. The only one you can get away without having is the 81 plus Archaeology requirement, because you can have a different relic setup. That being said, if you follow the one in this video, you're going to have a much better time at this boss. You also need to have the Bladed Dive ability unlocked from the Shattered Worlds minigame, which I'll leave a guide to linked in the description below if you don't have it. I'd like to remind everyone this is a very specific method, so you're going to want to have every single item listed in red in the gear setup. By following this exact same gear setup, you're going to have a copy-paste experience of what I had, basically meaning that you're going to have around the same kill speeds, you're going to encounter the same amount of mechanics, and you're going to eat around the same amount of food if you even need any food. It's worth pointing out that you do not need the hybrid version of the Itscrayonz. You can use the normal mode version, just be sure to have it because it makes overpower much stronger. The abyssal armor spikes are also optional, and you can choose whatever ring you'd like. Something you can also change are the type of boots you use, but be warned, you're going to want to have laceration boots with you as a switch to use Bladed Dive with, in combination with your scythe, Dragon Rider Lance, Laniake's Spear, or Masuda's War Spear. You're going to use these to clear the pools, which I'll explain later. As for your chest and leg armor, I'm going to suggest having Masterwork armor at the very least because it helps. Now, I did try a kill with Bandos armor on Augmented in the chest and leg slot, and it worked, but I was eating way more food. So that's something to keep in mind. I don't suggest doing it with Bandals because you're going to struggle a little bit more and maybe you'll panic. Now, the reason we are using an Abyssal Scourge here is for that passive damage it provides with its parasite stacks, which count as a bleed, which will also provide us with extra adrenaline from basics thanks to the Jaws of the Abyss helmet passive. The regular Gloves of Passage are also a major damage buff to this build, as every time you use the Havoc ability, the next attack within 6 seconds will deal 10% more damage, and your target will also take an additional 20% damage from bleeds, which is why you can see so many on the action bar, and is also why we're using an Abyssal Scourge. Finally, we're using the Dark Eye Slaver offhand to use Hurricane with dual-wield weapons. As for the inventory setup, it's really straightforward. We're going to need that Noxious Scythe, Laniake's Spear, Masuda's War Spear, or Dragon Rider Lance for the pulls. We're also going to need 1 Power Burst of Vitality, our Overload, a Super Restore, some Vulnerability Bombs to increase our damage by 10% for 1 minute, which you can keybind and easily throw using that keybind. You're also going to bring along some Panic Food in case you get hit by a mechanic and need to heal up quickly, but for the majority of situations, you're going to be casually chomping those blue blubber jellyfish to heal up during combat, as they don't drain your adrenaline, which means you can just casually chomp them while Revolution is doing its thing and dealing damage. To increase the amount of health healed, you can bring along your expensive spices because you have plenty of inventory slots left over. Finally, you're going to want to be using a Hellhound familiar plus scrolls, which you need to keep an eye on throughout the fight, as if it dies, you'll be losing that 20% damage reduction of the Hellhound, which is very, very useful. Now, it dies because that damage that you don't take is absorbed by the Hellhound himself. The way you heal it up is by using summoning scrolls. Now, it uses summoning points, so you won't be able to spam these unless you bring along a spiritual prayer potion to increase those summoning points to then use more scrolls throughout the fight. Alternatively, you can also overload on Spirit Weed Incense Sticks, which will increase the amount of summoning points you gain per minute. It's worth pointing out that every time you bank after a kill and you click on this crystal in the PVM hub, the health of the Hellhound will go back to full. As for your Archaeology relic setup, you can use either of these 2 relic setups as an example, which will increase the amount of damage you deal at lower HP and decrease the amount of damage you take. The one on the left also causes you not to need to adrenaline stall before the kill to start with 100%, and the one on the right actually makes phase 4 easier because you can escape and barge back into Raksha every 2 auto attacks much more easily, because it's just like you have the mobile perk. If you have the mobile perk on your gear, you don't need that relic power though. Raksha is located on Anachronia in the Northern Oubliette, which can be accessed after completing the Shadow of the Colossus mini quest, which you can start by talking to Laniake. I'll leave a guide to this mini quest in the description below. Before we get into the guide itself, I'd like to suggest that you turn on your game sounds, at least the voiceover sounds, as they're going to be very useful for one part of the fight, which is clearing the pools. And in case you haven't for whatever reason, activate thresholds and ultimate abilities in your Revolution settings. You want to start off the fight with 100% adrenaline, your overloads active, and of course Soul Split, Turmoil, and your Scrimshaw Vampirism turned on. Raksha has the following attack rotation in the first phase, which will consist of 200,000 life points. He will use 4 auto attacks, also known as hits, before using a special attack. If you are using the correct gear setup and action bar, you should only see about 2 special mechanics per phase. When starting off the fight, be sure to throw a vulnerability bomb for that 10% extra damage. After 4 attacks, you'll encounter your first tail swipe, which should always be a tail swipe because you're going to be in melee distance. If for whatever reason you aren't in melee distance, he will charge you instead. The way you avoid this attack is quite simple. You use escape and then barge. I recommend keybinding both of these. That way you just escape out and barge straight back in to deal more damage. Alternatively, you can also just walk backwards, but using escape and barge is far easier. Now, if you turned on game sounds like I mentioned earlier or suggested, you only really need to react to this sound, and then you'll always be able to react in time. Now, the next attack will stun you unless you use anticipation in time after 4 auto attacks, and that's the magic bomb. When you get stunned, simply use freedom, move out of the way about a second after that because a big magic bomb will come down and do magic damage to you. This magic bomb will not only deal damage to you but also place a sort of fiery smoke on the floor which will deal typeless damage to you constantly if you're standing anywhere near it. So don't stand in that smoke. Now, just as I explained that magic bomb attack, we hit 600,000 life points, which is the phasing HP for phase 2. In between phases, Raksha will stamp on the ground and rocks will fall from the ceiling. These rocks deal a considerable amount of damage and can kind of be dodged, but you'll likely get hit by 1 or 2 of these every time the boss phases. You can see the rocks coming by a sort of shadow in the floor before they drop, and you can reduce the amount of incoming damage by using Debilitate manually on Raksha if you wish to do so. Before we continue, I'd like to mention that phase 2 has a slightly different attack rotation, and you'll have different special mechanics like orbs and even a triple magic bomb if you're a bit slow. Now, just like in phase 1, in between each special mechanic you'll have 4 auto attacks, which means after the rock fall and the phasing part, you'll have 4 auto attacks before you see the orbs mechanic. Now, the orbs mechanic is super duper simple. All you need to do is click on the orbs you can see once, and that's it. The orbs look like this, and they're purple, and it is possible for these orbs to graphically glitch underneath Raksha or the pools, which is a little bit frustrating, but it doesn't mean you'll die as long as your health is high. So in case you can't see them, be sure to eat up quickly using your panic food, which are those silverfish I recommended earlier. In case you've taken a lot of damage from the mechanics, be sure to check up on your Hellhound familiar by healing it up using this button in case it's damaged. If the green bar is empty, that means you need some more summoning points or familiar points, so sip that spiritual prayer potion if required. At 400,000 life points, the third phase will start, but you'll also need to clear the pools, which is a little bit tricky to do. Alright, so for this part of the fight, it's going to be a little bit confusing, and this is by far the hardest part of the fight. You're going to need to focus and stay on Raksha while trying to avoid the rocks falling on top of you. You're going to do this, keep your health high, and sip your Power Burst of Vitality, which is that red potion in the inventory. The reason you do this is because you're waiting for a voice line before you start clearing those pools. You are waiting for this exact voice line.
The shadow grows thicker!
The shadow grows thicker, not to be confused with this voice line.
Do not let him absorb the shadow!
So keep your ears pitched for that exact voice line, and then you can start clearing those pools by using your scythe and bladed die. Now, it's very important that you have your laceration boots on and that scythe on, and then target the pools themselves. Not the ground in the middle if there's a hole, target the pools themselves to hit them all and clear them. It won't always work perfectly if you're a little bit too soon or a little bit too late. In that case, you can try to clear out individual pools that are left over, and otherwise the boss will be a little bit more enraged and deal a little bit more damage, but that isn't a huge deal. You can see how much Raksha has been enraged by looking at the percentage bar below his main health bar. Alright, we're in phase 3 now, and the attack rotation is again a little bit different, but you still have those 4 attacks before each special attack. Now, in this phase, you'll encounter these minions which you want to kill straight away because they drain your overload and deal a lot of melee damage, and they're just going to be annoying. Just take them out and then focus back onto Raksha. Now, for auto attacks after the orbs mechanic, you're going to encounter, without a doubt, because you'll have around the same DPS with this bar, the triple magic bomb mechanic. If you're counting the auto attacks, it is possible to anticipate it, but it's likely you'll get stunned, and all you need to do is use freedom and keep moving until all the bombs have hit the floor. Then go straight back to Raksha, and be sure to have some space between you and Raksha, because you'll likely encounter a tail swipe in this phase as well if you're a little bit slow or your RNG is unlucky. Now my RNG was good and I didn't mess up too many things in this particular kill, which is why I hit the 200,000 life points threshold and I'm going to phase 4. But this is something you don't want to do. Never ever corner yourself in this arena like this clip you're seeing on screen, because you're just going to get an unpleasantly big hit from that tail swipe. Alright, phase 4 is going to require a lot of focus, because every 2 hits you're going to need to move outside of melee distance because of a tail swipe that will come again and again. If you're not in melee distance after those 2 auto attacks in this phase, you'll get a magic bomb instead. So you get stunned and one of those big blue orbs or purpley orbs will come from the ceiling and place fire on the floor. Not very pleasant. Alright, so once you get into this phase, be sure to heal up your Hellhound if you haven't already and eat some food to be full health. Go into melee distance straight away and attack Raksha. You're going to count the auto attacks or listen to his noises to see that tail swipe coming. You're either going to walk backwards or, like in the first phase and the third phase, use escape and barge back in. Now you're not going to be able to do this every single time because of cooldowns, and even with a mobile perk it may not be on cooldown every single time. So you can also use bladed dive to go backwards and then walk back in. Alternatively, you can just walk backwards by clicking backwards and then walking back in. It's up to you. Now next you'll see this shield mechanic, and this is an instant kill mechanic if you cannot DPS down the blue health bar on the top, but because you're using a revolution bar and you're doing nothing else, you're just focusing on moving around, it will do it all for you. Don't worry about it. Now after breaking the shield, you'll see a bunch of these blue little anima pieces on the floor, which you can pick up by walking near them. You don't need to click on them, you can just walk near them. It's important you pick up at least a bunch of these, as they'll give you 10% more damage for a period of time per stack, so per piece of anima. I don't suggest picking up everything because there's a chance you'll mess up and get those magic bombs by not being in melee distance in time. But since Raksha stalls for a little bit and then you have 2 auto attacks before you need to be in melee distance, it is possible to at least pick up a bunch and then use this button, this blue extraction button, which can be put in a different spot in your interface settings to activate the buff. And then really it's more of the same, repeating this until you get Raksha down. Be sure to keep an eye on your Hellhound and to use your vulnerability bombs in case Vuln ends. The craziest thing about this method is that you actually don't have to focus on dealing damage and prey flicking, making this enormously learner friendly. Now sure, you still need to focus on your placement, especially in phase 4, and there's still a good chance you're going to die a few times, but this is so much more accessible than trying to focus on your damage rotation, prey flicking, making sure your health is high, making sure you're doing everything right. This is far less stressful, and definitely something I'm going to do if I ever go back to Raksha at all, because it just is so chill. With that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video and found it helpful. If you did, leave a like down below and maybe even consider subscribing, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.